Hello, conference. I'm Alys. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a member of the Edinburgh branch. I'm a councillor for Portobello and Craigmillar in Edinburgh, and I co-convene the councillor group in Edinburgh along with Ben Parker, who's sitting right there. I'm absolutely delighted to be welcoming you all to conference on behalf of the Edinburgh branch this year. Tiny bit of housekeeping. If you were here early, you'll know what the fire alarm sounds like. We're not expecting any others, so if you hear it, it is real, and please make your way out to the assembly point. I am here representing the Edinburgh branch, and I'd like to start off with a shout out to Zoe and Anne, our wonderful co-conveners, and all of the volunteers on committee who work so hard, running elections, hosting events, and even allocating branch spending through participatory budgeting. Yeah, other branches take note. And I want to thank the amazing Edinburgh members. Our monthly member councillor forums are always a joy and a much-needed remedy to a long day of dealing with other parties in Edinburgh Council. The branch are going to be hosting the post-conference social tonight, so please do come along. There'll be a quiz, some music, and catering from the Sly Fox, which is amazing if you haven't been there. I also want to thank all of you for being here today, whether in the room or joining us online, because I think spaces like this that bring Greens together are so needed at the moment. I'm sure I'm not the only one struggling right now with the fact that we are still 6 months on witnessing a genocide in Gaza at the hands of the Israeli government. I'm sure we all feel conflicted at the relief we felt at the mainstream media and politicians seem to have finally woken up to the horror, while at the same time seeing the deep, naked racism that is betrayed when it's only when white Western aid workers are murdered that some people are willing to say enough is enough. Lorna's going to say more. Lorna will speak more about how the Greens are taking action for peace later and putting pressure on the UK government to take action. But we also know that for change to happen, action is needed everywhere, from direct action and occupations to motions at local councils. And for all those Twitter trolls that tell us councillors should stick to talking about bins and potholes, Green councillors across Scotland are doing all they can to show solidarity with Palestine. From Shetland to Edinburgh, the Highlands to East Lothian, we've successfully persuaded our council to support a ceasefire. Just over a week ago, Glasgow Greens passed a motion reaffirming the support for ceasefire and, crucially, calling for investigation into the council's links to Israel through procurement. In Edinburgh, Steve Burgess is working for divestment through the Lothian Pension Fund. I know many of us will be missing the rallies we've been attending weekly by being here today, and anyone who wants to join for a solidarity action, please meet at the atrium at 12:30. But I also want to affirm from the platform that I've been given today that we stand in solidarity with Palestine and we will see a free Palestine in our lifetimes. Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! The deep-seated belief in peace and solidarity that we all share is just one of the reasons that I'm proud to be a Green. I'm reminded often of why I'm a Green. When Labour tweet, for example, on Trans Day of Visibility, that they will always stand with trans people, but refuse to do anything about the transphobia in their own party. I know that I'm in the right party when I see the trans flag flying high above Edinburgh City Chambers, thanks to a motion from Dan Heap. I'm glad to be a Green when the Lib Dems, Tories and Labour unite to reopen a quiet route to motorists in the very same committee meeting where they have sworn to do everything in their power to prevent another child dying in a cycle accident on the way to school. I know I'm in the right party when I see my colleagues Eula, Kaylee and Ben passionately protest this hypocrisy and fight for safe, sustainable travel. And when the SNP, our own partners in government, unilaterally announce a disastrous council tax freeze, I'm proud to be in a party where members and MSPs alike are clear that what we actually need is a progressive tax system and the redistribution of wealth, not an ill-thought-through policy designed only to appease voters and condemning local authorities to more austerity. And I'm proud to be a Green when I see messages from my fellow Green councillors on our WhatsApp across the country talking about the work they're doing in their own councils. So this seems like a good time to mention the newest member of the Green Councillor Group. Conference, will you please join me in welcoming, fresh from her historic by-election victory, Shona Hoy to the Green. It really was an amazing success, and huge congratulations to Shona and to the Glasgow Greens, who, although it pains me deeply to say it, now have the biggest Green councillor group in Scotland. Roll on 2027, when I'm sure Edinburgh will be able to right this wrong. But for now, we have 36 amazing councillors across Scotland working hard to put green values into practice. Being a councillor is a tough job because, as we all know, social justice and climate justice are inextricably interlinked. So there isn't anything that local authorities do that isn't a green issue. Just from looking at the page about Edinburgh councillors in your conference guide, you'll get a sense of the work that goes on, from persuading the council to be a visa sponsor to help welcome people to the city, to campaigning for local resources to stay in local hands, to securing sustainability work in our schools. There isn't anything the council does that we don't want green fingerprints on. Anyone who's met a Green councillor probably knows that saying, "That's just the way it's always been done," is a pretty good way to get our backs up. And Greens have been busy finding innovative ways to get stuff done differently, whether as a lone voice, as an opposition party member, or as partners of the administration. To give you a wee snapshot, feminist planning has been championed by Holly and Kaylee in Glasgow and Edinburgh, aiming to transform our two biggest cities into spaces that are safe, welcoming, and accessible. In Orkney, Christopher has successfully got environmental indexing and tracking of cruise ships, the first place in the UK to do so. Drake's nabbed a place on the Climate Change Board in Murray, the first elected member to be there, and is already forcing them to take long overdue actions for a just transition and on biodiversity. As well as chairing East Lothian's Climate Change Forum, Shona successfully got access to childcare as a consideration in the council's economic strategy, and I'm sure giving officers 101 on unpaid care in the meantime. Luna's just successfully helped to oust the Tories from administration in Argyll and Bute. Yeah. In Highland, Kate has persevered through outrageous behaviour and attacks against her to make a bid for Cllr to be a national park. And throughout the budget setting process, where it's felt even more than usual that local councils are being buffeted by forces out with our control, Greens have been pushing for transparency, accessible processes, consultation, investment in tackling the climate crisis, and spending to protect the most vulnerable. My God, just imagine what we can do when we're running the councils. This and more is all down to you in this room and Greens across Scotland, delivering leaflets, attending meetings, even just proudly wearing green badges. All of it brings green values into political reality. And lucky for us, with the general election coming up, we have an amazing opportunity to spread those green values far and wide. Our candidates are amazing. Many of them are in the room, and do chat to them if you get a chance. The opposition is uninspiring. And the mood is ripe for people to vote for change, for a vision they can actually believe in, for a positive future, not just something that might not be as bad as the past. So I hope you'll all join me in getting out there to campaign for the Green vote at the general election, whenever it might be. Have an absolutely brilliant conference. I hope you make the most of being in the wonderful city of Edinburgh. I hope to see lots of you at the social. And now I'm very pleased to hand over to our party co-leader, the Scottish Green Minister for Zero Carbon Buildings, Active Travel and Tenants' Rights, Patrick Harvie.
Thank you very much, Alys, for welcoming us to Edinburgh and to this venue. It's a room that we were in before. I think it was the room we held our conference in just after the IndieRef membership surge, a historic moment for the party. So it's really nice to be back here. Better still, as Alys said, to be back here just after another historic moment for the Scottish Green Party, our first ever by-election win anywhere in Scotland. So I also want to recognise the work and the inspirational campaign to get Shona Hoy, or as we in Glasgow know her, Shona, Hoy, 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 elected to Glasgow City Council. And if you were here early enough, when we had a little bit of drama beginning of the conference, I hope very much that you enjoyed the innovative, immersive FBU fringe that took place outside the building. I think that's a creative approach to engagement with the conference, so thank you to them very much. Lorna's going to say a little bit more as well about that Glasgow campaign, but if you haven't had a chance to look at the conference brochure and just turn to the page inside with this photograph, and yeah, love you Edinburgh pals, but count them, all 11 of them, count all 11 of them, and I'm sure that many of you will have a chance to speak, not just to our councillors in groups like Glasgow and Edinburgh, but our councillors right around the country and our other candidates who are doing so much to spread that green message. Listen, we are now well into the second half of our first ever term in government. And we've got just over 2 years until the next Scottish Parliament election. So it's a really important moment that we take some time to refocus on why we entered government. I'm really hoping that whoever's editing my speech live will please stop. To refocus on why we entered government, look at what we've achieved over the last couple of years, also at the work we still got to do, but also on the new challenges that are emerging right now, that demand new action from government. When we were first approached about the idea of joining the Scottish Government, almost 3 years ago now, our first task was to ask you, our party members, what the priorities should be. And among the really broad range of green policies, it was clear that one of the most important was the need to address unfair rents. We listened and we committed to delivering a new deal for tenants to address the imbalance of power in private renting in particular. It's a deal that was grounded in the principle that housing is a human right, a deal that means that people who rent can feel secure, and a deal that turns a rented flat or house into a home. It's a priority that I feel particularly strongly about. I know what it's like to be harassed out of a flat by an abusive landlord. I know what it's like to be left with debts when a joint tenancy ends badly, or forced to move from a home that I like because of a choice that somebody else imposed without any justification. So I'm really proud that as a party of government, we can deliver that new deal for tenants. But as the cost of living crisis began to bite, we knew that we had to act urgently as well as working on that long-term reform. And so I was very pleased that the first piece of legislation that the Scottish Greens delivered in government brought in an emergency rent freeze. It's something that has helped many thousands of people over the last 18 months, protecting them against literally unendurable rent hikes. And critically, it was legislation that, despite some of the criticisms at the time, withstood the legal challenge that was brought against it in the Court of Session. If we had failed that test, we would have done more harm than good. And the claims that the emergency rent cap would also lead to a reduction in the available property have also proved to be false, with the number of registered rented properties in Scotland actually increasing during the period of the cap. But here in Scotland, just as in other parts of the UK where tenants haven't had that protection against annual rent rises, rents have continued to rise in between tenancies. And that's just one aspect of a system that isn't delivering that human right to housing in the way that it should. So I'm proud that last month I was able to press on with the next step in delivering that new deal for tenants by publishing the Housing Bill. And that will bring in finally bring in a permanent system of rent controls for Scotland, because we should never accept that rents can simply spiral out of control, satisfying only those who hold the power in a broken housing market. And because people who rent their home should have just as much right as everybody else to make their house into a home, the new bill will also give a wide range of other rights. Things like the right to keep pets and to decorate. These are not luxuries or add-ons. These are fundamental issues that contribute to people's well-being and happiness at home. We'll be reclaiming millions of pounds of unclaimed deposits and using that to fund services to support tenants. And we're making changes that strengthen the power to challenge evictions, protect people in tenancies who've experienced domestic abuse, and give people rights when a joint tenancy ends. This bill will help to make renting a long-term and secure option in the way that is in many other European countries. And as we take that bill through Parliament, I'll be working really closely with our Green colleague Ariane Burgess in her role as convener of the Holyrood Committee that leads on scrutinising housing. I've been advocating change like this in Parliament for well over a decade now. And the case has also been built steadily by housing campaigners across the country as well. But make no mistake, it's happening now because you made the choice. You made tenants' rights a priority, and you gave us the chance to do more than just make speeches about it. You gave us the chance to make this a reality. Now, we all know, it feels like every time in the last few years I've said it's been a tough year. It's been a really tough several years, in fact, in so many different ways. And this year has been tough as well, with the UK continuing to impose deep cuts as they continue their brutal austerity agenda. But even against that backdrop, we've been determined to continue progress on green priorities. Not only did we achieve record funding for climate action, nature restoration and decarbonising our homes, we've continued the transformational policies like the Scottish Child Payment, lifting 100,000 children out of poverty and scrapping school meal debt across the whole of Scotland. On that last issue, I want to pay tribute to our colleague Ross Greer as well. It was his investigation that first revealed how many children in this country were going hungry in schools and how many families were being chased for debts they simply couldn't afford to pay. No parent should be kept awake at night worried about how they're going to pay for their children to eat. And with Scottish Greens in government, we've been able to act, wiping out over £1 million of debt to councils, a constant source of anxiety hanging over people's heads and one that we've been able to remove. And we're continuing with things like investment in school kitchens, working to ensure that every child in Scotland's primary schools will receive free school meals as well. We've funded this kind of work and much more with the most progressive income tax system anywhere in the UK. Greens have been leading the case for using Scotland's powers to develop progressive income tax policies. We've been leading that case for well over a decade. And once again, this year, we've gone further. Due to the changes that we secured, the top 5% of earners will be contributing more to maintaining our public services. The newest changes come into effect today, and I believe it's right and fair that here in Scotland we are asking the wealthiest people to pay their share to fund things like a Scottish Child Payment that's lifting families out of poverty, delivering a real living wage for public sector contracts and supporting the services that we all rely on daily. But this year, as every year, we live with the stark reminder as well of what Scotland's missing out on. The basic powers of a normal, independent country to raise money, to invest in public services and a green economy, and to rebalance wealth. Austerity has been the choice of this Tory Westminster government for the last 14 years. It's been imposed on Scotland for all of those years to the detriment of our communities and our public services, both nationally and locally. Like many people, and I'm sure like many of you, I'll be delighted come election night to enjoy watching those little blue dots on the map disappear one by one. But it will only really be worth celebrating in the morning if an incoming government ditches the Tory fiscal rules, ditches the Tory spending limits, and ditches Tory austerity that is harming the lives of so many. We do need to see the back of this toxic Tory government, but if Labour continue their current determination to offer status quo politics and status quo austerity, it would be a betrayal of everyone voting for change. Our party grew out of the ecological movements of the 20th century. And we've been defined more than anything by the cause of environmental and social justice going hand in hand. The climate and nature emergency is the reason that many of us in this room became active in green politics. It is no longer merely an imminent threat. It is here and it is now. It is a clear and present danger to all of us and to the living world around us. It is the defining issue not just for this generation, it will be so for every generation. And yet we need to be honest, the coherent emergency response that it demands is still lacking. We've had a political system largely unwilling or unable to take the radical action that's necessary to halt catastrophic global heating. And it has been our duty as the Green Movement to be the political voice for climate action. Last month, the UK Climate Change Committee, the independent advisory body to both Scottish and UK governments, concluded that Scotland is almost certainly going to miss the 2030 climate target. Now, Scotland has had legally binding climate targets for a decade and a half now, And back at the start of that process, I had the privilege of chairing the parliamentary committee that scrutinised the first Climate Change Act. At first, I was really taken aback by the ease with which consensus seemed to be emerging. There was a strong, united civil society demand from environmental organisations, of course, and campaigners, but also from trade unions, from religious communities, from industry, from anti-poverty organisations. That strong, united civil society demand was very, very clear. But there was also political consensus in Parliament. Every single political party seeking to make the bill stronger, and the handful of outright climate deniers seemed to be left marginalised. But by the time the final debates on that first Climate Change Act were taking place to pass the legislation, I felt that the reason for that early, easy consensus was becoming clear, and I felt that it was actually nothing to celebrate. In the final debate on the bill, I said, targets alone are not enough. They are necessary but not sufficient. They will not be achieved without a radical shift in policy on transport, housing, land use, food and energy. And a few months later, as we were debating the Copenhagen COP, I told Parliament that we had in fact achieved only consensus of intent. We'd in fact taken the easy path of agreeing the targets we wanted to reach, but not agreeing how we were going to reach them. In fact, Scottish politics at that time and since had a complete lack of consensus on the actions that would be necessary. Scotland's done really, really well on decarbonising energy production. But that was already happening before that legislation was in place, and it was not accelerated by it. And in other sectors, transport, land use, heating, we've seen 15 years of largely flatline emissions. Now, if successive Scottish and UK governments had taken the actions needed, I'm in absolutely no doubt that we would be on track for that 2030 target. Instead, too many politicians in every other political party engaged in mutual backslapping about world-leading targets, while at the same time demanding ever more money for road building, supporting relentless aviation growth, lobbying for status quo rural policies to the benefit of big landowners, and cheering to the rafters every time a new oil and gas licence was announced. The failure to unite on the action is the reason why now it's clear that we should be decades ahead of where we are now. And we would have been decades ahead of where we are now if Scotland had implemented the policies that we, as Scottish Greens, had been advocating for years. Well, the warnings now about that 2030 target need to be a wake-up call to everyone. Scotland needs a reset on climate policy. We will have to make fundamental changes as a result of that report, not just to stay within the law, but to shift the emphasis from targets onto accelerated action. Targets do matter, but they matter if we use them to focus our minds on the action. They must never be treated as a substitute for action. That 2030 target was set back in 2019, in the midst of global climate strikes by young people around the world. And across the political divide, we once again saw the emergence of consensus of intent. All political parties rushing to declare a climate emergency. But that was the easy part. The hard part of actually deciding how we're going to achieve those targets and how we rapidly deliver changes to the way we travel, the way we heat our homes, use our land and power our industries. That's the hard task still facing us. And as Scottish Greens, we have a responsibility not just to advocate for accelerated action, but to make it happen. Affordable and accessible public transport for everyone, warmer, greener homes, a just transition in the North Sea, and a rapid restoration of nature to help mitigate the effects of climate change. And the communities most reliant on the industries of the past can and must be on the front line of our shift to a fairer, greener, and more sustainable future. They can be the engine that powers our shift away from dirty fossil fuels toward a clean, green, renewable energy system. One of the biggest areas of policy that Scottish Greens are responsible for in government is decarbonising our homes. And even while they were issuing that stark warning on the 2030 target, the UK Climate Change Committee held up our action on this agenda as a template for the rest of the UK to follow, showing how we can urgently shift away from our dependence on gas to heat our homes and instead use the plentiful renewable energy supplies that we have here in Scotland. Now, we consulted on those plans earlier this year, and the challenge now is to get the legislation over the line in the face of the coordinated and concerted opposition that we know we'll face from those who benefit from the status quo. But we also need to see increased, accelerated ambition in those other areas of policy that were highlighted in the report that remain our biggest emitters: agriculture, transport, industry. This needs to be a shared mission right across the Scottish Government if we're going to hold on to the hope of delivering the change that's needed. And as for consensus, I think we need to recognise that complete political consensus on the action may well be impossible, as the Tories here in Scotland drag climate policy into their toxic culture war space, just as Rishi Sunak has done. We cannot afford to dilute or delay action in the hope of achieving consensus with those who will always prioritise the free market extremism of the Tufton Street junk tanks. And we must never use the limits of devolution as an excuse not to act. But we do need to recognise that reserved powers are currently being exercised by a government that is as irresponsible and dangerous on climate as they are on every other aspect of our society. As a result of their anti-climate agenda, we're seeing green investment put at risk, and we're seeing rising hostility to climate action in the UK politics and media. This is a Tory government that is trying to drill its way out of a crisis, that's delaying the action that will make a difference, and that's even in the process of opening a new coal mine. We cannot leave our future in their hands. They're a government that knows that Scotland's abundant, clean, green energy is among the cheapest electricity we can generate, but they're still failing to pass on the benefit of those low prices of generation to consumers, to cut the cost of living and to create real incentives to shift away from fossil fuels for heat and transport. But neither can we sit back and wait for Labour to take this climate crisis seriously, not when Keir Starmer has already given us 28 billion reasons not to trust him on this issue. Even with the most important powers to make a difference, both the main Westminster parties are trying to sell off ever more of our North Sea to the highest bidder. The Scottish Greens will never support drilling in Rosebank, not now, not ever, and Labour must not be allowed to nod it through if they form a government. The world around us is changing, and it is deplorable that some appear happy to treat even the most basic proposals for a response as though they represent some kind of form of extremism, while they themselves continue to back a failed economic model that has brought the crisis about. Time and time again, climate policies are being obstructed and opposed by those who just want to draw a political dividing line for their own self-interest, no matter the cost to people and planet. That's why we still need Greens more than ever, not just making the case for climate action, but making it happen. And that was the fundamental reason we chose to enter government in 2021, because we cannot demand climate action and then only recoil when we're asked to deliver it. Even at the start of this journey, we knew that we were starting far too late on many of these issues. Like the rest of the world, Scotland has been held back by decades of propaganda and climate denial conspiracies from the fossil fuel industry and by the politicians who do their bidding. And it takes decades to fundamentally change how we produce our food, to see native forests regenerate and regrow, and to make sure that every home in Scotland is well insulated and heated with renewables. So we are indeed far behind where we should be. But the only response to that is to accelerate action now. Let's be clear. The Climate Change Committee itself has been clear. Scotland's ultimate goal of reaching net zero by 2045 is absolutely still achievable, but only if we accelerate action now. There will be difficult decisions, some of them immediate, as the Scottish Government responds to the CCC report, and other challenging decisions lie further ahead of us. But we need to recognise that this is a pivotal moment in our climate journey. It does require a reset of climate policy from the Scottish Government, and we, as Scottish Greens, we have a responsibility to insist that that happens and to shape it. Scotland's climate targets are important, but they are only meaningful with an ambitious acceleration of action to actually make them achievable. We need that acceleration of action going far beyond what's been done before. And we know that if we get this right, we're not just ensuring that our planet is habitable for future generations, critical though that is, we'll also be giving people in the here and now the warmer homes that they need, that are cheaper to heat. We'll be creating well-paid, highly skilled, unionised jobs that will still be here for decades to come. And we'll be getting commuters out of traffic jams and onto affordable, reliable public transport. Everyone benefits from climate action, and now is the time we must accelerate it. Now, with that, I want to hand over to my wonderful office mate, fellow co-leader of the Scottish Greens, Minister for Circular Economy, Green Skills, Biodiversity, the fabulous Lorna Slater.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, conference. Thank you for everything that you do for our party and our movement. You have made us the party that we are and made everything that Alys and Patrick spoke about possible. It starts here at conference. It starts with our members. It starts with you. This is how we make green change. Change that is more vital now than ever. For decades, the climate emergency, which Patrick spoke so passionately about, has been intertwined with a catastrophic decline in nature. The same forces that have profited from digging up and burning every last drop of fossil fuels have also extracted and used up our natural resources in a way which has left life on this planet hanging in the balance. Over 1 million species globally face extinction, whilst here in Scotland, nearly half our species have decreased in abundance in recent decades. So the mission to restore nature has also been central to our time in government, because just as climate action benefits us all, restoring our natural environment benefits us all. From the communities who welcome visitors coming to see our stunning and unique landscapes, to farmers who have rich, healthy soils and sustainable ecosystems in which to grow our food. Since we met last autumn, we've made some exciting progress in delivering our commitments to restore Scotland's environment, and as Minister for Biodiversity, it has been my privilege to drive them forward. In the Butte House Agreement, we promised to establish a groundbreaking new nature restoration fund. Since then, I have overseen more than £40 million of investment through that fund, restoring vital habitats like Atlantic rainforests, our rivers, and saving species. We have also committed to creating at least one new national park for Scotland, building on the 20 years of success for communities and nature that we've seen in Scotland's 2 existing parks. After extensive work by local community groups, I was delighted to announce a few weeks ago 5 potential sites for a new national park in Galloway, the Borders, Perthshire, Loch Aber and Loch Awe. There is overwhelming public support for national parks because here in Scotland, national parks are about creating special places where nature, communities, and visitors can come together, coexist, and thrive together. They drive investment, not just into restoring the natural environment, but also creating facilities for people to enjoy nature in a sustainable way, and creating housing and employment for the communities who live and work there. They are an amazing example of how green policies benefit both people and planet. And I can't wait to announce where our next national park will be before the summer. This is, of course, only one part of our work in this area. Only last month, we passed a historic piece of legislation, which is the result of decades of campaigning by environmental activists, Scottish Greens members, MSPs, including some of you in this room here today. The Wildlife Management and Muirburn Bill finally creates a system of licensing for grouse moors in Scotland, which will tackle the long history of wildlife persecution on shooting estates. It bans the cruel and barbaric use of snares, which cause long and painful deaths for wild animals, and gives the SSPCA new powers to investigate wildlife crime and support the police to bring those who persecute wild animals to justice. My colleague Mark Ruskell has been campaigning for these powers since 2016. And this year, with Greens in government, we were able to deliver them. This bill says that Scotland values our iconic birds of prey, our unique heather moors, and the myriad of wildlife that make the uplands their home. You don't get to destroy these in the name of sport or profit. As long ago as 1998, Scotland's first First Minister, Donald Dewar, called the persecution of birds of prey in Scotland a national disgrace. It was true then, and it's true now. It's taken the Scottish Greens in government to finally take steps to ending it. Another area where we've been able to translate community campaigning into legislative action has been on disposable vapes. We've all seen the blight these vapes and their packaging cause to our landscape, with more than 2.6 million disposable vapes being littered in Scotland every year. With many of them directly marketed at children and young people, the untold health impacts vaping could cause the next generation are terrifying. The campaign to ban single-use vapes united environmental and health campaigners and was driven by my colleague Gillian Mackay in the Scottish Parliament. We worked with concerned communities across all 4 nations of the UK, and as of the 1st of April next year, they will be banned. This is how we work with campaigns on the ground and turn them into action. This is Scottish Greens in government, delivering for people and planet. People and planet. The two have to go together. You cannot have environmental justice without social justice. We will always stand up for human rights and stand with vulnerable communities. That's why we have pushed for support for communities on the brutal front line of Westminster cuts. That's why we've been working to deliver a watertight ban on so-called conversion practices, driven tirelessly by our own Rainbow Greens and my MSP colleague, Maggie Chapman. It is why, especially when we are seeing such scaremongering and hostility, we will stand with trans and gender diverse people. Everyone has a right to safety, dignity, and respect. Whether it is people spouting bile on social media or the tech billionaires profiting from it, there is no room for bigotry. Trans rights are human rights. Equality isn't just a word to us. It is right at the heart of our values and what we stand for. 2024, then, is a pivotal year. This year, perhaps more than ever, our vision needs to go out beyond our borders here in Scotland. In 2024, nearly half the world's population will go to the polls in 64 countries, including the US, the European Union, and here in the UK. This is our last chance to elect politicians and governments who will seize the opportunity and act on the climate emergency before it is too late. It could not come at a more crucial time for global peace and security. With no end in sight to the brutal invasion of Ukraine, and Putin now in power until at least the end of this decade, the specter of war remains firmly on our doorstep here in Europe. Meanwhile, the genocide and famine in Gaza continues. Some of the worst war crimes of the 21st century are being inflicted on a vulnerable civilian population in a brutal act of collective punishment. Back in November, the Scottish Parliament voted overwhelmingly to support a full and immediate end to the ongoing slaughter in Gaza. And less than 2 weeks ago, the UN Security Council finally got on board and declared that the global community demands a ceasefire too. It has been shameful to see the politicking that has taken place at Westminster, descending into chaos and procedural infighting in an attempt to avoid even debating a ceasefire. When we see genocide happening, we try to stop it. The UK government tries to arm those perpetrating it. In the last 10 years, the UK has licensed at least £500 million worth of arms sales to Israel, weapons which have been used to inflict untold misery on an entire population. How many more people will have to die before they can bring themselves to say enough is enough? Last month, the United Nations expert panel called for a halt to arms sales. This week, 600 lawyers and judges, including some of the world's most eminent lawyers, joined them. Even some Tory MPs are saying it's time. It should not have taken the killing of UK citizens for this to happen. Hundreds of aid workers and journalists and tens of thousands of innocent people have already been killed. Hospitals, schools, and homes and lives have been destroyed. But finally, the prospect of an arms embargo is now real, and it must be achieved. We are doing everything we can with the limited powers we have here in Scotland. That's why we have called for an end to all Scottish government contracts for companies fueling the repression of Palestinians, and for an end to all Scottish enterprise support for the arms companies profiting from the destruction. Thanks to the Scottish Greens and other ceasefire campaigners, Israeli military flights are now banned from using the publicly owned Prestwick Airport. But one airport is not enough. The Scottish Greens are calling for all Israeli military flights to be banned from all UK airspace and an immediate halt to all UK arms sales to Israel. We will not stand back and be complicit in slaughter. We will never support genocide. We will always stand up for human rights and with the people of Gaza. Later this year, when we finally go to the polls in the general election, we have the chance to demand better, to demand a government that takes the plight of Palestinians seriously, to demand a government that takes our climate seriously, and to demand a government that will support people through the cost of living crisis, rather than punishing the most vulnerable while offering tax breaks to their wealthy friends. We are at a crossroads. And Scottish Green voices have never been so necessary, they have never been so vital. Rent controls, free bus travel for young people, a real living wage for public sector workers, buffer zones to protect people accessing reproductive health care, a ban on conversion practice. These things don't happen by themselves. They need Scottish Greens working with campaigners and our communities to deliver that change. A strong Scottish Green turnout at the general election would change our politics. It would be the wake-up call that is so desperately needed if we are to take real climate action and tackle the scandal of child poverty. We know that when we get Greens elected, people like what we do. That is why more people than ever are supporting Scottish Green candidates. People feel proud to have Scottish Greens fighting their corner and know that we will be a powerful, effective voice, whether that's in council chambers, the Scottish Parliament, or in government. Nowhere has that been more apparent than in Hillhead. I also want to congratulate our newest Scottish Green councillor, Shona Hoy. Hoy, hoy, hoy! Shona was a fantastic candidate and will be a huge asset to the Glasgow Greens group. But I also want to take a moment to pay tribute to the great team that offered that amazing result. And it starts with the legend that is our other councillor for Glasgow Hillhead, Martha Wardrop. I have never before knocked on doors where so many people knew their councillor. And I don't mean they just knew they had a Scottish Green councillor. They knew Martha by name. So many of them had been personally helped by her in the 17 years that she has represented their local community. And they recognize the tireless campaigning and work that Martha has done. Martha and her fellow Glasgow councillors have been making people's lives better day in and day out. We'll be hearing from both of our wonderful councillors for Hillhead later in the day at the closing plenary, so do please stick around for that. There was a huge team behind that amazing result, though, so I want to thank everyone who coordinated and contributed to that effort. It is the single most organised and professional campaign that I have ever taken part in as a Scottish Greens member. And it has been an inspiration to branches up and down the country who will be ramping up our campaigning in the next coming years. So congratulations again to Shona, Martha, and congratulations to everyone who made such a historic result possible. We've talked a lot this morning about the good stuff that we're doing for people and planet. But if Hillhead teaches us anything, it is that in this political environment, it's not enough to just do good things. We need to get out there, knocking on doors, and tell people how we're making their lives better. And that starts this year, with this year's general election. It is only with Scottish Greens in the room and on the ballot paper that the voice of the climate movement will be heard in this crucial election. It is only the Scottish Greens who will be championing an economy that works for people and planet, which puts power in the hands of workers and a fair wage in everyone's pocket. It is only the Scottish Greens who will fight to ensure that Scotland is granted the powers of an independent country, not just for the sake of independence alone, but so that we can build a better country based on fairness, equality, and climate justice. We want as many people as possible to have the chance to vote for the Scottish Greens and for our vision. We want as many people as possible to be able to vote for climate action and equality. I'm delighted to confirm today that the Scottish Greens will be standing more candidates than ever before in the upcoming general election. And here's why. This UK Tory government is not fit for purpose. It has broken its promises to the people. It has failed in every single duty. It has cost jobs, it has cost lives, and it is time for them to go. Labour have already reversed their position on climate action. The Scottish Greens, we belong in every election, at every level of government, from councils to Holyrood and beyond. So to everyone in this room, I urge you to take inspiration from conference today, go back to your communities and your branches, and get involved in the election campaign. Because people and planet need us. They need us now more than ever, and we are ready to step up.
Thanks, folks. That's us off for a break now, so please go.